Hi, everybody. I'm going to present this little ditty of information I found out about our family. And I want to tell you how I did it because it's certainly not all inclusive. I went from grandpa to his father, his father, his father, his father, his father, his father, his father. That should be 9 fathers, back to when they left England in 1635. Um, So that means that our family has been in what is now America for 391 years. And next year on Grandpa's birthday, it'll be 391 years. That is a very, very long time. I also wanted to say that I have I had gotten back to Richard Davis I think the year Mom died, but I couldn't connect Richard to his father. I knew it was somewhere in Virginia or North Carolina. I saw different things, but finally, um, maybe around a year ago, totally by accident, I found a definite, true link. All the links for the to verify the family lineage are through birth records, marriage records, christening records, uh, ship lists, and all those sorts of things. So, what I have about these 9 fellows is verified. I didn't, there's a couple little things about the women, no particular reason for that. I had to keep it as simple as possible because what I did find was so daggone interesting. Okay, so here we go. Robert Davis, 1609 to 1693. It seems that everybody used to have their name Davies, and when they got to what is now America, they dropped that E. I tried to find out why, but wasn't able to. So, our first ancestor is Robert Davis. He left Gravesend, London, England in 1635 at the age of 26. Keep in mind that the Mayflower landed in 1620. He came to the same Plymouth colony, but in a part called Yarmouth, where he lived for a short while, and then the neighboring town he moved to called Barnstable. I thought it was pronounced Barnstable, but um, I heard people call it Barnstable, so I'll stick with that. In the pictures up there, you can see where he left London, and then a closer shot of where the port would be in London, in Gravesend, which is it's like they're sending the ships off to their grave, right? And of course, going to the New World, I found that little picture that was from that time. How in the world did Robert Davis uh, afford, or how did he come here? Well, he was an indentured servant. Of course, the Pilgrims and all those people probably had more money. Um, there were definitely families that came to what was called the Plymouth plantations that had more money, because you could see on the passenger lists of the ships that they came with their children and their wives and servants and things like, people that could make shoes and different sorts of occupations that would, be good on a plantation. This is what the port of Gravesend looked like in 1662. Obviously several years after he left, but you could see it looks quite country. I'm sure it looks quite different now. So the voyage would have taken between 6 and 12 weeks to arrive to the Plymouth colonies. They estimate that 1 in 10 would not make the journey. I do have a list of the people that were on his ship. Most were men, some were women. Very few were women, but everybody on his ship appeared to be some kind of a servant, and so I'm sure their accommodations were not as nice as some. So he arrived in 1635 in Yarmouth. Well, this is what Yarmouth looked like at the time. And this fella on the left, his name is Richard Mather. I put his picture up there so people could see what, a richer person might look like in 1635 in the Plymouth colonies. But interestingly enough, once Robert got here that same year, a few months later, they had the Great Colonial Hurricane. Apparently it was terrible. And Richard, who came over months after, I'm referring to Richard Mather there, the guy with the open book, he came a few months later than Robert Davies. And I found what he wrote in his diary while he was waiting out the storm on the ship. Can you imagine how scary that was? And he says, when news was brought to us in the gun room that the danger was past, oh, how our hearts did then relent and melt within us, and how we burst into tears of joy amongst ourselves, in love unto our gracious God, in admiration of his kindness in granting to his poor servants such an extraordinary and miraculous deliverance. I can't even imagine how frightening that must have been. So next we see how the ships would have come over to Yarmouth. I think I mentioned, there's so much to remember even though I have notes, that he came as an indentured servant. Well, only the poorest people, from what I could find, did that. He was a 26-year-old man. He had to sign a very formal pledge and take an oath that he would be loyal to England and also to the Church of England, who were killing people who did not attend or give allegiance to the Church of England at that time. So the contracts for indentured servants it varied, but generally it was between 4 and 7 years. I have not been able to find how many years he initially signed up for. But at the end of his, generally what the contracts included were whatever the number of years were, and then people would get, for that, they'd get passage on the ship. And when they got there, they lived with the family, and the man who they had the contract with was called their master. They had no rights whatsoever, none. They had, according to the laws there in the colony, they had the same rights as children, which were zero. And so from what I could find for him, whenever he was done with his contracts, and it seems like he probably took more than one, because he went from Yarmouth to Barnstable, and you can see those are really close. They're, towns next door to each other. When he left, excuse me, my allergies. When he left, he was apparently given some acres. It was usually 5 acres for a man, and I noticed they would sometimes also get a couple of bushels of corn. I read that oftentimes women didn't necessarily get what they were supposed to get at the end of the contract. The conditions for indentured servitudes were not different really from slavery. They were kept in usually in poor quarters, bare minimum clothing, food, etc. But the colonies insisted that the families who, had them, they were in contract with, uh, kept them until they died if they were still under contract, because the colonies didn't want to have to take care of people. And so, even though they had no rights, they did have a right to sue their master if the master didn't hold up their end of the contract. Of course, that was not easy to do. I read about one fella that had to sue because he did not have adequate clothing and apparently almost lost or did lose one of his feet in the winter, while he was, of course, still expected to work because he didn't have adequate shoes. And I read where the judge told his master, really all that happened was like, get the guy some shoes. None of the indentured servants, as I said, had any rights whatsoever. They were not allowed to, and these are specific things that they point out, they were not allowed to play cards or dice, could not go into or be served by the victuals house, which to us would be a restaurant or a tavern. And I guess that's where we get the term victuals. On the second offense of any of these things, they would be whipped publicly. Robert Davis then married in 1645. That's 10 years after he arrived. He would have had to have gotten a formal permission, and they moved to Barnstable, that second pointy arrow there. And he had our next ancestor in line, Andrew Davis. Here are 2 pages out of a historical book that I read. I didn't read the whole thing. I'm not going to lie. But I read this about Robert Davis specifically. And the lady that did this research, and I believe it was 1888 or 1887, used older historical records for this. So I'm pretty sure I'm sending a link in the email to this book, but I also wanted to put the pages up here. So the historian who wrote this book said, the earliest entry I found of his name, and that's Robert Davis, on the records is the 12th of May, 1657, when a grant of, quote, a parcel of common land, end quote, in the common field was made to him. He was admitted as a free man of the colony in 1659. And think of this. He was 50 years old and had worked 24 years to earn the title and the rights of a free man, to have equal rights with everyone else in the Plymouth colony. The book then went on to quote an older book that she did research with that said this about him. Robert Davis was not a man of wealth. He was not distinguished in political life, nor was he ever entitled to the then honorable appellation of Mr. Sorry about that. He was an honest, and in quotes it said, he was an honest man, an honest, good man, and got his living by his labor. Sounds familiar. Okay, so then here is his son, Andrew Davis, born in 1650 in Barnstable, but at some point in his life moved to London, Connecticut, where he died in 1719. He had married Mary Davis in 1684. I have no idea if he became an indentured servant, or how he earned his living, but at any rate, in New London, Connecticut, he married Mary Davis. They had 3 children, and he died there in 1719. And his son, our next ancestor, is Andrew Davis Jr. Andrew Davis Jr. Andrew was born in New London in 1690, married Sarah Davis, had 6 children, one of which was a stepchild. And I had to throw this in here for the sake of comedy. One of his girls was named Jemima. Yep, Jemima. And for Uncle Billy, his son was the first William in our family, one of his sons, but he was not the direct ancestor. He would be a kind of uncle. And his son is the third Andrew. And so we have the original Andrew, then Andrew Jr., born in London, Connecticut, and then Andrew Davis III, who was born in Christ Church Parish, Middlesex, Virginia, in 1709. He died at the age of 50, and I couldn't find why or how, but his father, the second Andrew, Andrew Jr., died back in New London. But Andrew Davis III was born in Christ Church Parish, Middlesex, Virginia, England. That's a lot, right? So now we get, and again, I don't know much about them except for this. And so next we have the next highly interesting person who I had already had the lineage, at least, back to him, I think the year Mom died, but I couldn't get past Richard Davis. But Richard Davis is extremely interesting. Richard Davis was born in August of 1740 and died in 1815 in what is now Middlesboro, Kentucky. When he died there, the whole area was simply known as Yellow Creek, Kentucky, pretty much with the same state lines it has now, was considered a county of the Virginia colony. And then I found through an archaeological paper where they were trying to find the Davis Tavern that he opened, and I'll get to more of that later. It was written in, I believe it was 1957, that many thought that Richard Davis, was the first, if not one of the first, if not the first permanent settler in that area, because he and another man were the chain carriers for this first surveys that took place in what is now Kentucky after a man bought, I believe, 2,000 acres from the Cherokee. Okay, so this is a paragraph from that PDF. I think I attach a link to this too. It's all about the survey done to try to find the original site of the Davis Tavern, which Richard built with his wife Elizabeth. There are lots of references to it. There was a tavern. A tavern in those days would have been a place to eat, drink, sleep overnight, kind of like a hotel with food. And that's what they ran there. On this page, this is a shot looking straight down onto Middlesboro. This is looking north from the Pinnacle Peak in the Cumberland Gap Historical Park. I've been up there looking straight down here. And where you see that pink or red area I have marked there, right in there is part of the 200 acres that he had. Now there's controversy between 200 and 2,000 acres. But it looks, I talked to a historian in Middlesboro about this years ago, and it's very likely that it was 200 acres, even though there is a copy, one of those old-fashioned copies, I can't remember what they call it, of a record made in pencil that says 2,000 acres. But it's highly unlikely because he sold the 2,000 acres. Well, skip that. Sorry, let me get to that later. But the area at the bottom of that kind of rectangle that I drew there, where maybe you can see that's a kind of a street, almost like a block with lots that have mobile homes on them. That area would have been part of his property, and that area that I have drawn there, and it would have gone back further to the right as we're looking at it. So this is looking due north, and if you go up that highway, pretty soon you're going to be up in Knox County by Barbourville. At this time, I believe this was just Kentucky County, part of West Virginia. Now, I have the picture of these two fellows here because the one on the right is Dylan Asher, and Dylan Asher married Richard Davis's oldest daughter and was given half of Richard Davis' estate. And so I found this picture and just wanted to put it here to show, what the fellows likely would have been wearing at that time in this area. Okay. And of course, his land was this was the Yellow Creek area, like I said. It wasn't called Middlesboro or any of that stuff. It was Virginia, Kentucky County. And Yellow Creek is a big creek that runs through there that goes off of the Cumberland someplace, but there is a branch that was called Davis Branch because it ran through his property. And I could show you in a minute, like, where that is. But I like seeing this. I don't know if those fellows are twins. They're brothers. I know that, and I forget the other one's name. But so he had 200 acres there. Carrying the chains got him some of the acreage. And if he did, in fact, fight in the Revolutionary War, which I find a lot of things that say that, but I can't find, a document for that he fought in the Revolutionary War. He, certainly would have been the right age. But at any rate, like I said, that the first land in Kentucky that was surveyed by him, I should say by his boss, of course. And that was purchased from the Cherokee. However, in 1799, the government decided that the land belonged to the Cherokee because of a treaty that was made after that original survey was made and divided up, including the 200 Davis acres. They sent in soldiers to destroy the homes and crops of those settlers. And Elizabeth, Richard's wife, later sued after he died for damages for $150.50 for the damages done to their home, and she was paid that money. They obviously rebuilt whatever was damaged, and probably not everything was damaged because there are references to the tavern operating again in 1800 and after that. There are some drawings of where they think the tavern specifically was, which the tavern itself, that one building, they think probably is right under whatever, that 25 East going south, right before it goes into the tunnel. So here, this is an approximation of what 200 acres would look like. So I thought I'd throw that in there. I have no idea about the shape, but it was at the base of the mountain there. And that creek you see running through it is the Davis branch of the Yellow Creek that goes kind of toward the left. The rest of what is now Middlesboro now, but just called Yellow Creek. Here are some more pictures. The one on the left is obviously the aerial satellite view. You could see the Davis branch. The property would have run probably, under what is 25 East now, along the base of the mountain there, and Davis, the Davis branch of the Yellow Creek. And here the second picture, I went down on the road with the little yellow man and satellite pictures to show if you're standing where those mobile homes are at the very edge. If you see that on the left, it's like a little foot that sticks down where those mobile homes are. I position that so that what you're looking at from this view is straight into what would be part of the park now. And behind those trees, just a little ways, would be the Davis branch. What else can I say about this? There was a mill. There's various references to it. I had a book that I need to get again because I lost it, called The Magic City, and that's what Yellow Creek was called at some point. And there's an entire chapter dedicated to the Davis chapter. It's really interesting. I got to buy the book again. I can't believe I lost it. I'm trying to think of what else to tell you about that. Okay, Richard Davis, he had, is it 6 daughters and 1 son? Either way, he had all these daughters and 1 son. His son was Preston, who will be the next direct descendant of ours. His wife, Elizabeth, in that book, it said that somebody that came through there, some preacher that stayed at their tavern, said that she was known as the, in quotes, Cap'n Molly of the Gap, and that she ruled it. There's another quote about her someplace that's pretty funny. I guess we'll get to that if I can find it. But Richard Davis left a will. He wrote it the same year that he died in 1815. And I guess, there's a certain way that they did it back then, but he left half of his estate to his 1 daughter who was married to that Dillon Asher fellow. By the way, that Dillon Asher fellow was the first toll keeper at the Narrows in Pineville. So that's where they settled. The other half of his estate was left to his wife. And then that was to be left to his only son, Preston, once she passed. And of course, Preston would stay and help his mother and deal with the estate and everything while she was still living. Okay, Preston helped his mother run the plantation after Richard died. Now, I use the word plantation because later I find it in a record referring to it as a plantation. The same record that says 2,000 acres, as I said, written in pencil. I'm really thinking there's an extra 0, except for the fact as it's called a plantation in the formal papers, I looked up what would constitute a plantation in this area this time. And it said it was usually over 1,000 acres. So I'm like, well, great. There's another question mark. And he had a very formal will. And also, someone else says that here, that Richard Davis became one of the wealthiest men in Knox County at the time. Of course, that wasn't Knox County at that time. It was Kentucky. That's Kentucky County. He was said to have been the great uncle of Jefferson Davis, who was closely associated with Daniel Boone. And yes, he had 6 daughters and 1 son. And he married Elizabeth Preston. So she became Elizabeth Davis, and they named their only son, the seventh child, Preston, the Davis. And here is a note I have about the sale of 2,000 acres. Elizabeth Davis and Preston Davis, represented by Attorney Sims, blah, 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 dated May 10th, 1821 for $1,200. 2,000 acres patented to Richard Davis, deceased and inured to them, the last will and testament. Now, in his will, which is easily found online, if you put in the will of Richard Davis and just put in Middlesboro, Kentucky, it will come up. It was super formal, but again, the price, $1,200. When the issue about, in 1799, when the issue about his land came up, saying, well, no, this is the Indian land, and we're going to have to destroy your stuff, leave it to the government. When that happened, that's the first time that, and for that reason, I suppose, Richard had a survey done of his land, and it said at that time that it was second-rate land and was worth $10 an acre. It was marshy, and he was running a tavern at the most convenient place. As soon as people come through the gap, bam, it's there. So again, I think that probably that last zero was an add-on, even though his will was extremely formal looking, and he was said to have been one of the richest men there. I also found a little list of some of the stuff that was in his estate, a cupboard with china, billiard table, and things like that. So if he did become rich or one of the wealthiest men there, it was basically from innkeeping. And so now here we are with Preston, who was born in 1797, 2 years before. So he would have been a baby when they came in there and destroyed stuff, because they had made another treaty with the Indians. So Preston lived there, and I couldn't find anything about Preston for the life of me. And by the way, I have no idea where these people are buried, where Preston or Richard are buried, or Elizabeth. Maybe someday I'll go down there and be able to find out. But at any rate, Preston, at the age of 64, joined the Union Army and fought in the Civil War. I'm not kidding. I checked and double checked this. I think back then, they were going to take anybody. Now, we already know that his father, from a census record that I have here, had in his house 3 slaves. Of course, it gave how many men a certain age, and everybody in his household. But it said he had 3 slaves and 1 Indian, and after it said 1 Indian, in parentheses it says no taxes. So I guess if you had an Indian living on your farm, there were no taxes. I don't know, but I just thought that was interesting and heck. And the thing is, Kentucky was neutral. Preston signed up for the Union Army, and there was fighting right there in the gap. And then also there was a big fight in Barbourville, which was, I don't think it was called Barbourville at the time. It was just Knox County by the time they got there. So I haven't found when they were buried, but he had his son. Our next person in line was W.R. Davis, and we've all seen that headstone down in the Davis Cemetery in Barbourville. And he is the man who is William Roscoe Davis. I found his middle name was Roscoe, and he died the year before Grandpa was born. And that is his portrait that everybody is probably familiar with and hung in Grandpa's house, I believe, my whole life. Later, Mom got it. That's not the original frame. I have it, but it's fell apart at the seams. I remember once at Grandpa's house when I was a little girl, Mom painted the original frame black. And I also remember, I put a little note here, that when I was a little girl, I was fascinated with that picture for some reason. I have no idea. And I remember telling Grandpa when I was a little girl that I wanted that, when I grew up, when he died. And he said to me, "Girl, I ain't dead yet." I think that's hilarious. It sounds like him. Okay, so he was born in Yellow Creek. It was still called Yellow Creek. Middlesboro wasn't founded till much later. He was Preston's son. I don't know how he made his living, if he farmed or whatever, but at some point, he and his wife left and moved up the road to Barbourville, where he bought 800 acres on the bend of the Cumberland River we now know as Davies Bend. We all know where the church cemetery and our last 2 acres are. I'm hoping, one day for that. But Uncle Billy might know more about him than I do. That's about all I've been able to find, except he obviously got some money down there in Yellow Creek. I don't know if he was a soldier, what he did, but if he bought 800 acres, that was pretty good, because my understanding I also read that was good farming land at that bend. I think the bend is, I was going to say by the church, but that's not it. So then the next in our direct line is William Harvey Davis, W.H., who is Grandpa's dad. And I didn't know what the H stood for either, but then I found it was William Harvey, and I guess that also explains Uncle Harv's name, I assume. Here he is on a porch. I love this picture because you can see the 2 doors, the one right in back of him and the one to his left side. I don't know which baby that is he has on his lap. It might be a child, it could be a grandchild, niece or nephew, I don't know, but look at that cute cat over there. And, from 800 acres to being split up through all the kids, I don't know a lot about that. I was talking about that picture, but I didn't realize I didn't have it up. Oh yeah, and I wanted to say, check out those wing-tipped shoes. I bet those were his best shoes he put on for this picture. And there's a little cat I was talking about, and the baby. I don't know who that is. I don't know it's hard to say how old he is, but I would say the grandpa looks more like his mother. And it sure would be cool if one of us could get the 2 acres down there sometime. I know, was it 2 years ago? Kathy, Mike, Scott, Gina, and myself went down there. We walked all over it. We found that huge cedar tree and a big pile of rocks at his base that the fella talking to us there, who runs his horse and bushwhacks the 2 acres every year, told us that those were stones from what would have been the fireplace. And I sure wish that I had picked up 1 or 2 of those stones to bring back. But hope is not lost. Maybe one of us will get that and buy it. And of course, this leads us back to our 9th generation in the United States, Kelly Davis, who I don't think had a middle name. I put the metal Social Security card they sent Grandpa in 1976 at the bicentennial. So he would have been 71, I guess, right? Yeah. He would have been 71. Please don't anybody use his social security number for any nefarious reasons. So next I have some kind of random pictures. Here's a picture of Grandpa with his work buddies at the railroad. And I cut that picture out of him. And I think it's funny when we look at pictures of Grandpa and Aunt Lucy and everybody, they stood so straight and they looked so stern, but they were just not used to having their pictures taken all the time and knowing how to smile and pose, so they would just stand there. And there he is with his lanky self, how I remember him when I was a kid. Of course, he was a little bit older, but this would be in Ohio. And I know he worked with his friend that would pick him up for work, and I don't know if he's in that picture or not, but I don't recognize anybody. These next pictures are various ones. Kathy and I had recently talked about these. Now, this is Grandma and the girls, adorable picture, and I am pretty sure this is in when they got up to the East End. But these other 4 pictures, when Kathy and I were talking about them, oh wow, I missed a picture of Mom and Ruby. But anyway, we figure those were taken when they went down to visit after having moved to Cincinnati because of their ages and because somebody's standing there with Aunt Nora that she obviously does not want to court, but he looks like he's interested in her. There's Mom. There's Grandma Levita and Grandma Sally standing outside of a brick house. I guess that's the Collins house. There's Great Grandma Alice down here. And I think Grandpa looks more like her than his dad. And yeah, we've got pictures of her someplace with a corncob pipe. And by the way, the rumor that she was an Indian is, I suppose, dispelled because I have no Indian in my DNA. I'm not sure how that goes exactly. And here is also a picture I included just because I happen to have it, and that is Bruce. Oh, I guess I did that twice. Oh, well, that's okay. Here's that picture of Bruce again because I had this picture of the schoolhouse. And here is Uncle Glenn. Look how handsome and how dark that hair was and how much he looked like Bruce. This picture of Bruce and these fellows holding the fire hose is from that day that huge explosion happened in Richmond. And this was on my TV. I was watching YouTube, I think last year. And I happened to see this picture as they're going along in this documentary about Richmond and the explosion. And I saw this and I remember seeing this picture. Uncle Glenn and Aunt Barb had it. I don't know if it was from a newspaper, but I took that picture with my camera from the TV screen. So I just thought it was so neat. And I don't know if Jeff will remember this. And I'm assuming it's the same building, but I have a memory of Jeff and I finding, it seemed to me like we were in the woods. I was very young, and I think it's one of the times we went down in the back of Uncle Billy's station wagon to Kentucky. And I think it seemed to me like Jeff and I took a big walk. It couldn't have been a big walk, but we found this schoolhouse, and I remember looking inside and seeing desks. I haven't asked Jeff about that, but if he remembers that, but I had a memory of that. And so that's about it. Everybody that might listen to this probably knows I'm referring basically to Uncle Billy, and any of my, me or my cousins, that level of the family, know more about Grandpa and coming up to the city. But I have to say something. Our family spent 105 years along the seacoast of the United States. And then, oh my gosh, where's my math? well over 200 years. I had it written down someplace. 200, well over 200 years um, in Kentucky between Middlesboro and um, Barbourville. And I just can't help but think the difference in living that kind of a life where you knew your own all your neighbors and many were relatives, and it was rural, and there was no electricity, no outhouses. Um, it was 4 miles from the Davis Bend Church up at the town in Barbourville. So anybody living on Davis Bend would have walked or took a horse or a mule or something into town when they needed to, I suppose. And I can't imagine the cultural shock coming north to live um, after all those years living a certain kind of way. But anyway, I was kind of floored by that realization. But anyway, I just wanted to share this stuff with you guys. It's certainly not some kind of a professional or complete presentation, but it's what I had. And I was going crazy trying to get it done. Um, and the problem was, the more I looked into it, the more I found, and it was just harder and harder to get out of the rabbit holes. But I thought our first relative, Robert Davis, coming from England, was astonishing. Richard Davis's story was astonishing, and WR's, I love that name, Roscoe. Now that I know what it is, that his story was astonishing, and the whole history is pretty astonishing to me. So these next two little things, I want to see if anybody remembers these. I remember Grandpa used to sing that to me. And this, teacher, teacher, don't whip me, whip that boy behind that tree. He stole money, I stole honey. Teacher, teacher, ain't that funny? I just think it's hilarious. And so anyway, that's all, folks. And I love y'all. And oh my gosh, this has gone on for almost 50 minutes. And I don't know if anybody would be interested in this, but you might want to pass it on to your kids. Everybody take care. Bye-bye.